Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for this live recording of the Squiggly Careers podcast. Some of you may have listened to Squiggly Careers before, but if not, we'll introduce ourselves because we're the co-hosts of the podcast, and then we've also brought with us tonight some amazing guests who are going to have the conversation with on the podcast. So my name's Helen, I'm one of the co-hosts, and this is Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming and not going to Richard Dawkins.
Oh, poor Richard. And we also are co-founders of a business called Amazing If, and what Sarah and I do in our work is we aim to make work a bit better for everyone. And one of the things that we do to contribute to that mission is that we do the podcast. So it's a weekly podcast, and we talk about lots of topics that we think can help people to take ownership of their career. So whether it's about how you can take control of your boundaries because they're getting a bit blurred, how to be brilliant in your new job, how to have courageous conversations, how to manage your manager, all of those things, we tend to do a bit of research, share our own experiences, and really focus on how people can take action. So that's a big thing about something we're really passionate about, is helping people take ownership of their career. And in this podcast, we're going to be talking about work and well-being, which is becoming an increasing area of focus as our working lives become more always on, those boundaries become blurred, and much more a topic that people are thinking about and, moving from something that they forget about on their to-do list all the way to the top. And we've brought some people to talk to us today to give us different perspectives on work and well-being that we can learn from and hopefully take some actions from ourselves. So we're going to talk to everybody separately so we can hear about them, but just very, very quick. First off, Sarah's going to talk to Tom, and we're going to talk a bit about the conversations we need to be having about work and well-being and how we can create safe spaces for those conversations. And then Sarah and I are going to talk to Pip. And for Pip, we're going to talk about some of the situations that really trigger your thoughts about work and well-being, really focusing on actually starting up and scaling businesses. And then I'm going to talk to Sabrina, and we're going to talk a bit about expectations and pressure, and what that means for work and well-being and what we can do about it. So that's what you're going to hear about. We hope you come away informed, inspired, and able to take action.
So this is Tom, and Tom, I think, is the epitome of a squiggly career, and basically he does two things simultaneously. He is both a world-renowned barber, which, if you think that puts pressure on you when you're doing your hair in the morning, you would be right. But alongside being a world-renowned barber, he's also the founder of something called the Lion Collective, which is really about trying to break down the stigma about conversations around mental health, particularly men's mental health, with the kind of ultimate aim of preventing things like, at its most serious, suicide. I think we have more awareness now of kind of suicide in the UK, but just a few stats to put this really into context. So in 2019, there were about 6,500 suicides in the UK, and about 3/4 of those were men. And that actually is the highest number that we've seen for quite a few years. So it is an increasing problem. So Tom, I wouldn't necessarily have put those two things together, barber, mental health. So kind of tell me why this kind of started. Where did it come from?
Well, neither would I. When I started out in the hair industry when I was 18, I never thought I'd be an ambassador for mental health and suicide prevention. It started out in 2015. There was on a Facebook group, a barber's Facebook group. My idea was I was going to create a collection of images, like a lookbook of lots of different haircuts that we would then sell to raise money for a charity. I gathered 30 of the probably biggest and well-known barbers in the industry that I knew, got them to donate an image of a haircut, which you think would be simple, but it was probably one of the most stressful things I've ever done to this day. It's like herding cats a little bit. But we got it done, and I was trying to think about what we're going to do it for. And one of the guys, Paul Mack from Ireland, suggested suicide prevention and mental health awareness. And I'd actually lost a friend to suicide a year before, and I didn't know that he was suffering. And I thought, how could I have missed that as a charity if I've been affected by it directly, but I was completely unaware that suicide prevention or mental health charities were things that we could raise money for or raise awareness for? That made me think how many people out there are struggling alone, are suffering, and don't know where to go or what to do. So that's kind of how it started. It's just a one-off project. Yeah. Well, we realised very quickly that it could be a lot more than that.
So talk to me a bit. I actually went down, Tom runs something called Barber Talk Light, which is mental health first aid training. So I turned up with lots of barbers, feeling, again, very self-conscious about my hair, to do one of Tom's training sessions and talk to everybody a bit about that relationship between somebody cutting your hair and the conversations that can start and how powerful they can be.
We did it was going to be a one-off project, and I realised very quickly that actually, as barbers and hairdressers, it'd been joked about since I started at Tony & Guy, that my manager said to me, he goes, "Oh, you're going to be a therapist now, you're going to be a psychiatrist, you're going to listen to everyone's problems." And it's been joked about in the hair industry for years that we are a poor man's psychiatrist. but it's just the way it is. But, I realised that there's a lot of trust in our barbers. We have a connection. We have the license to touch. You have a conversation uninterrupted for maybe 30 minutes, an hour. If you're having your hair coloured as a girl, 2-3 hours maybe. And you don't very often have that time away from the chaos of life, having a one-to-one conversation with people. Plus, I'm running my fingers through a guy's beard or through his neck or through his hair, which would just be weird if I just came up to anyone in the room and started touching your hair. But if you're sat in front of me in a barber's chair, it's perfectly normal. And that connection there, I've known people for maybe 20 years, and they've told me everything from first date with their now wife, their engagement ring before they show anyone else. They showed me baby names. They've told me about miscarriages. They've told me about affairs. They've told me about all these different things, but I never see them outside of those four walls of the barbershop. So we've got a very strong relationship, but we're also disconnected. So I think they feel they can trust us. So I realised that actually as hairdressers, barbers, we're listening a lot of the time. We're good listeners, have good empathy. What if we could train those people, hairdressers and barbers, to be more effective? So that's where we come up with the idea for Barber Talk, after doing mental health first aid training myself, assist suicide prevention, safe talk, and trying to get barbers to come to that. It was from the feedback from the barbers, it was a bit too heavy for them. 2 days off work, most of them are self-employed. They didn't really want to go and talk about suicide for 2 days in that depth. So that's where we worked together with leading psychiatrists to develop Barber Talk training.
So I guess the catalyst for this from you was a very tough moment personally with your friend. But since you've started kind of the Lion Collective, what sort of success stories and kind of positive things what impact are they having?
Yeah, it's been incredible, really. The response that we've had, it was just an idea. I never really had to push it or anything. It's just kind of happened organically, really, and it sort of ran away for itself. And I'm still trying to catch up with the idea right now. But it's that whole thing of giving those barbers those four pillars of the Barber Talk, to be able to recognise the signs, be able to ask the right direct questions, ones that we wouldn't normally ask, things like, are you suicidal? Are you depressed? Those sort of questions that people find very difficult to ask because we're scared of the answer. So once they've recognised the signs, they've asked those questions, teaching them how to listen with empathy and without judgment, and not trying to solve the problem and jump in, and because we feel like we've got to solve the problem, don't we, all the time? Actually let people talk, they solve it themselves a lot of the time. And then finally help. So we want to give them the knowledge to be able to pass that person on to the resources that are available. So the idea is to recognise the signs and then help them pass it on, so we're not left holding the ball, trying to solve a problem that we shouldn't be trying to solve, bridging the gap between the community we serve and the resources that are available already. And through that training, we've managed to save lives. We saved our first life, I remember saving, was my friend Paul. I thought if we could save one life starting this off, it would be worthwhile. But when that happened, it seemed to snowball. More people would tell us that if it wasn't for you guys, then we wouldn't be here anymore. If it wasn't, there was no stigma or no taboo to walk into the barber shop and sit there and tell my barber, who's been trained, and he had knowledge of where to go, and I wasn't going to be diagnosed or something or prescribed something. It was much more relaxed like that. And probably the biggest reward out of all of this, I think I told you before, was I sold my salon now, so I can do the charity most full-time and my global barber director stuff. And on the last day, a guy come in and bought me a card that I hadn't seen before, and I thought it was just like a thank you card or well done or whatever it may be, congratulations. And I got home, I opened the card, and it was actually from Paul's parents thanking me. If it wasn't for me, then they would have lost their son. I think that is the biggest reward out of everything. And, when I sold my salon, my accountant was like, what are you doing? My parents were like, what are you doing? You're getting rid of your business. And I said, well, that is worthwhile doing just for that.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that actually really struck me and perhaps surprised me when I came and did the training was also how strong the community that you've built is, in terms of the people who are coming to be the trainers and then the ambassadors, and how that community in its own right is almost taking on a bit of a life of its own. So talk to me a bit about how that's kind of developing and kind of your model, I guess, in terms of how you're going to keep building the Lion Collective, because at the moment, like you say, it can't just be you all of the time.
No, I don't want it to be me. I want it to be as separate from me as possible, really. Eventually, I want it to just be the Lions Barber Collective. Don't think of Tom Chapman. There's loads of other people doing that. And we've got ambassadors that are friends of mine throughout the hair industry who are quite influential within the industry, who have helped us grow, spread the word. And then we now have prospects who want to become an ambassador, so they have to kind of prove themselves and come along to the training and come along. We do safe space pop-ups at different events. So we're doing stuff with Cardiff Rugby and Exeter Chiefs and Cardiff City Football Club, where guys gather and are emotionally charged. It's okay for you to cry on your stranger's shoulder when your football team loses, but not in normal life, which is, but we want to get into those kind of spaces as well. So they come along and do that. And then we are trying to build up. We want to get into the curriculum, really. We want to get Barber Talk into the hair curriculum, make it part of the health and safety. We were in Westminster a couple of weeks ago discussing it. We're going back up there next week to try and do that, because if we can do that and we can train the future generations, and in 20 years' time, the whole hair industry is trained.
So thank you so much, Tom. If people would like to learn more about Tom and the work that he does, he did an incredible TED Talk that you can go and watch, and you can go onto the Lion Collective website, and we'll come back to Tom at the end when we ask everyone for their best piece of career advice. But thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
No, thank you, everyone.
So our next guest is the lovely Pip Murray, and I first became aware of Pip around about 2015, so I used to work for Virgin. I remember some sachets of almond butter were getting shared around the office, and I remember squeezing into my mouth, being like, this is amazing, what is this stuff? And it was like, oh, it's a new business that Virgin is somewhere involved in called Pip and Nut. And Pip Murray is the founder of Pip and Nut, and I have to tell you, since that moment, I'm honestly like an addict.
Are you hooked?
I am. I mean, I could talk for an hour about almond butter. I won't, because it's not that related to work and wellbeing. But yeah, suffice to say, 1 kilogram tubs. I've had to ration myself to a weekly pot.
Well done.
I share it with my family.
That's restraint right there.
So proper almond butter Pip and Nut fan right here. But one of the things we really wanted to talk about with Pip is actually some of the challenges of starting up a business and scaling a business. More and more people are starting ventures, so whether it's as a side project or whether it's something they want to become their kind of full-time role, it's more common in the world of work now that people are looking to do that. But it brings a whole new set of pressures into how we manage our careers. And as someone who has had the startup and it is now scaling up, I think, is Pip Nut available in over, the thing I saw was over 2,300 outlets? Is it even more now?
6,000 now.
Oh my goodness, I thought it might be old data. Yeah, I mean, as someone who's scaled up a business to that extent, what challenges have you experienced in terms of your well-being and your ability to spend time thinking about your well-being when you are the founder of a rapidly scaling business?
I think with a scaling businesses, it moves without you kind of necessarily being always fully in control of it. And every year of the business kind of growing, my job has changed, and with that, my stretch and learning has to kind of move with that. And I guess from a kind of wellness experience, that also changes. So the first couple of years I set up the business, and we launched in 2015, and I spent 2 years prior to that setting up the company. And I'm a sole founder, so I set the business up by myself. And I think those first 2 years are incredibly lonely. I mean, if anyone's in that stage, I kind of feel for you, because it's both really terrifying because you're kind of exposing yourself to a whole new swathe of stuff that you don't know anything about. And context here was that I was a theatre producer before I started up a food brand. So not a commercial bone in my body, let alone knowing how to manufacture anything. And you're doing it all by yourself, and I was 24 at the time. So really kind of fresh-faced, didn't really have a clue. But incredibly stressful, and I think isolating in the sense that nobody really understands what it is that you're trying to create. It's all in your head at that particular moment when you're in that startup phase. And you're kind of navigating something that's just really, really hard and trying to get support along the way. So, and especially when you're doing it as a sole founder, I think you two are lucky to have found people, a pair of you that can support each other. And then I think once the business launches and you've got the momentum and you're kind of growing and scaling it, again, it's a bit of an adrenaline rush, but with that comes monumental F-ups. And those moments are, again, terrifying. I mean, as an example, I remember, don't want to bring in Brexit because it's not particularly fun topic. We've all heard too much about it. But I remember the day that got announced, and we buy a lot of our products in Europe, and we're exposed by the exchange rate. And it wasn't something I'd ever really thought about in terms of that impacting me and the company so significantly. And it wiped out 10% of our margin, which for a food and drink brand is really, really brutal. And I remember just thinking, I don't know what we're going to do. I've got a team here in front of me that I've got to be strong for. And it's back to that kind of isolation point where you feel a little bit exposed and you're being relied upon to continue to pay the people that are within your business and continue to maintain the brand and scale it. And the positive things with all this is that you do figure it out most of the time, and no challenge is something you can't navigate. But it doesn't mean in those moments where you hit something completely new, it's not incredibly difficult and you sit there head in hand. I remember I walked out the office and went for a cry around the park and called my accountant, which was really sad. And it was particularly bleak. But then, look at us now, we're fine. And you kind of, as you move throughout the business, those big challenges, you kind of look back on and you think you feel stronger coming through them. And it's those sort of perspective, when you hit challenges as the business now grows, you can be like, well, I managed to get over that thing, so I can probably get over this thing. So I think experience, unknowingly, is also part of that.
Teacher.
Yeah.
And have you now got things that you've consciously put in place, whether it's things that you do with the team or things that you do for yourself, that help you to sort of preempt some of those F-up type things so that you're a bit more resilient when they might happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it is about having sort of a support network around you. So hiring the right people is the first port of call. I mean, I've got a team now, so they are incredibly experienced. They're much smarter than I am. They know what they're doing, and actually they kind of protect me. And I think also when you're in that startup phase, you are having to juggle your cash flow. You're having to manage the supply chain, be the face and the PR person, and then you've got to do the social media on the side. And slowly but surely your job slightly streamlines, and actually you can be more focused. And I do find not being the person to constantly manage the day-to-day cash flow of the business, although I'm aware of what's going on, actually does lift a weight off you, because you're not constantly worrying like how much money is in the bank. So those sorts of things, if you build a team, you start to be able to get a bit more balance. And I think one of the things I've found, particularly in our, like, we're 5 years old now, but in sort of the first couple of years, I would just say yes to like absolutely everything. Didn't matter what it was, a packet of crisps opening, I'd be there. Like, you know, it was just, you know, I'd just sign myself up for stuff.
Thank you for saying yes to this before you
This
started.
is a really good packet of crisps. And yeah, you just find yourself running like a mad woman all around London and just sort of not really knowing what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think now it's about trying to create some real structure within your day and actually be clear about what it is that you're doing that week, that month, that year, and saying no to loads more things, because yeah, there are always going to be opportunities, but everything's an opportunity cost. So if you really want to be focusing on, I don't know, sustainability, but you're running around doing lots of PR stuff, you're not going to be able to focus on some of those really important things. So getting a bit of control, I think, around your day helps. Although I think inevitably it's a startup. It happens.
Sarah, will tell you, I do love like a cheesy quote, but I think there might be one in the making there, like that everything's an opportunity, but everything else is an opportunity cost.
Yeah, there we go.
Like learning to say no.
I'm sure I've saw that.
I knew you'd get one in there
I knew
somewhere.
I'd find one.
And what about Pip? You do a lot of exercise.
Yeah.
So you kind of talk a lot about, I think last year you did the Amsterdam Marathon, you've done the London Marathon.
Yeah.
I think you've publicly said you're going to do the Rome one.
Yeah.
Are you committing to that? Do you want to commit to that on a podcast?
God, no.
But you've also talked about things that you do with your team. So when you do team days, you talked about, I think, something called like a sound bath, which I was really intrigued to find out more about. So what like sort of things around, you know, whether it's physical fitness or just thinking about your well-being generally, whether that's kind of meditation, mindfulness, what sort of things have you brought into the business now that you're 5 years old to think, I know this helps us all to kind of stay well?
It's been a big focus actually over the past couple of years. We, as a business, certifies as a B Corp in the summer, which is essentially a business that balances sort of profit and purpose. And with that, it covers loads of things, but within it is people is a really key pillar. And a lot of that is down to how you treat your team, how you operate as a company, and how, you know, as an employer, what are your responsibilities. So a lot of the focus has been like, how do we create an environment that really supports our team members? And I think there are kind of lovely things that you can do, that team bonding stuff, like we've done all sorts from trapezing to sound baths, which are really quite odd experiences, quite different as well. But I think actually it's the basics that you've got to get right. So we introduce things like flexi time and working from home days. So we have core hours 10 till 4, and then people can flex either side. And I think if you have an environment which is probably quite stressful, you know, in terms of a fast-paced business, it's moving, but then people also have to balance their life, whether they're caring for someone or have family, whatever it is. I think things like that, having flexibility within the company, is probably the most important thing. It doesn't really matter if we have nice breakfast in the morning and all sorts of different lovely things, but I think those are the things that are meaningful.
I think we sometimes get slightly distracted, don't we, by those like shiny objects of table tennis tables or like bean bags or whatever it is, but actually fundamentally it's like, can I make work with the rest of my life? Do I feel like my employer actually really cares about me?
Because I think that's when I tend to feel most kind of wound up and stressed, is when my life is starting to cave in and like work is absorbed over everything. And so even simple things like working from home one day a week can create a sense of calm. If I'm experiencing that, if I benefit from that, then I think surely my team do. So yeah, I think that sort of thing is really important.
And how have you built your resilience over time? So you've talked a bit about, of course, things go wrong, but I think having been in those kind of environments, they're incredibly fast-paced. I think we all need now in our careers more resilience than ever before because of the amount of change and ambiguity that we're all experiencing. Some of it we're in control of, some of it less so. What have you felt you've kind of done well in terms of that ability to kind of bounce back? Yes, sometimes it might be Brexit, sometimes it might just be a tough day, and everything kind of in between.
Yeah, I mean, I remember once when I was starting out that someone once told me, like, as a leader in a business, you should never have a bad day or show that you're having a bad day, which I was probably actually one of the worst pieces of advice I've ever been given, because at least for the first couple of years, I was like, if I was having a terrible day, I'd walk into the office and be like, I'm all right, I'm all good, and I'd kind of pop back in, and then behind the scenes, I'd be like, this is awful. And actually now, I think it doesn't mean that you have to go in and be a dark cloud in the office, but I think if you've got some core people in your team, or whether it's mentor, whatever, and you can sort of talk openly about something that's actually hard, to your very point, it's not so much about solving the problem, it's just about sharing and feeling like that other people are there to support you. So I think there is an element of like recognizing when things are difficult and just telling other people and not pretending like things are okay, because that's, I think, ultimately the worst thing.
And you've talked about mentoring. I think lots of people ask us about mentoring and how do I find a mentor? Are mentors important? What's that process been like for you? Because it sounds like it's been quite important during the last 5 years.
Yeah, and I think particularly starting up the business by myself, having a really great mentor is my version of a co-founder if I ever had one. So important. I think finding a mentor that is difficult, so it's not actually that easy in the same way I think it probably is as to find a co-founder, but finding someone that firstly has either been on a startup journey or really understands what startup is, ideally works in the industry that you're in, really, really helps. And there is a lot around kind of, I think, just general rapport and working styles that you have to kind of figure out whether or not they're right for you. I met my mentor, who's a guy called Giles Brooke. He runs Vita Coco. It's a coconut water drink, amongst other things. And I met him through my branding agency, actually, and from the get-go, I think he just really understood the brand. He's actually our largest investor now, so it also was quite beneficial in that sense.
Oh, useful.
Brilliant.
Very strategic.
But actually, it has been brilliant, because he is the sort of person that always has a bigger war story or kind of war wound, whatever you want to call it. So whenever I come to him with a problem, he'll be like, don't worry, I've got something to top this. And it's suddenly that's what makes you feel so much better. But it's not just that, it's somebody that is a bit of a coach. So particularly when you're talking about being a leader or a team, that's actually really hard. And I never knew how to run a company or manage a team, and actually having someone to kind of be that support and ear to kind of lend your neuroses, or be able to speak a little bit about like what's going on in your head around how do I manage that team member, or I'm not really sure about how to do personal development plans, all these, whatever it happens to be, they can be a kind of support in that sense, a coach.
Pip, thank you so much for sharing the last 5 years and what you've learned, and hopefully people can think a little bit about their support systems and how they can build some of those kind of wellbeing practices, sound baths, maybe, into what they're doing. Thank you very, very much for sharing.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pip.
I am delighted to welcome our third and final guest to this week's podcast. This is Dr Sabrina Cohen-Hatton, who I was introduced to a few months ago now. And let me kind of tell you what Sabrina does, and then I'll tell you why, when I first heard about what Sabrina does, I didn't even know what to say. I was kind of like breathtaken by everything that Sabrina does. So Sabrina is a chief fire officer, amazing, well, also saving lives. I think quite interesting that you're both doing that. Sabrina is also a psychologist. She's also an author of a book called The Heat of the Moment, and a working parent too. So I think all of those things are absolutely amazing individually, but when they're put collectively, it's very special. But the thing that I think really took my breath away was when I heard Sabrina talk about, we talk on Amazing about squiggly career journeys, and I think you've got a squiggly life journey, and just a few of the things that really stuck out for me. So Sabrina was homeless for 2 years when you were 15. You sold The Big Issue to raise money to have secure and stable accommodation, because you were homeless and it was anything but stable and secure, and just some very upsetting stories that you shared from that time, and the resilience is amazing. You joined the fire service and faced significant amounts of discrimination when you joined, then progressed in the fire service despite that discrimination, did a PhD to support with decision making in the fire service and how to reduce human error, as in decisions that would affect people's lives. And some of the research has now been implemented by the fire service, and it's changed the way the fire service manages things. I mean, it's amazing, everybody. I was like, oh, wow, I'm total awe. And I Instagrammed Sabrina straight away. And I was like, I need to talk to you on the podcast. So honestly, there's so much you can learn. And Sabrina's book is amazing. And we'll talk about book signings later on, so you can kind of maybe go and speak to Sabrina about it. But my reflection of it all is there's so much pressure in what you do. As chief fire officer, so many people's lives are interested into kind of your strategic thinking about what they're doing. How do you cope with the pressure? Because I feel like if you can cope with that pressure and we can learn from it, that's quite helpful to maybe all of us. So are you aware of the pressure and how do you cope?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that you make a really, really good point about resilience and the pressure that you face. And I think sometimes you can separate it into two things. There can be the pressure that you're experiencing at a really difficult point in time. And then there's also the kind of cumulative effects of pressure. I like the pressure that you were talking about, Pip, that you experience when day to day you're responsible for so much and you've got so many people that are relying on you. And I think that it's almost like stress, isn't it? You have that acute stress and then you can have that very chronic stress. And I think they're very different things. I think if I talk first of all about that resilience that you might have at a really difficult point in time, that moment, I think what I would say is you're all stronger than you think you are, first and foremost. Whatever happens, even if it turns out terribly, the world will still turn, the sun will still rise, and tomorrow will always come. So although it feels uncomfortable at the time, put one foot in front of the other and you'll still carry on. And I think in terms of the more chronic stress, that more chronic pressure and how you build the resilience to that, I think that certainly from my perspective, whatever you do, day on day, you will always find a new gear. And if you do it long enough, that new gear becomes your steady gear. And then you will find you'll have more. I mean, when I was doing my PhD, I was still serving as a firefighter. So I'd go in the lab at 5:30 in the morning. I would run my experiments, and then I'd go into work. I'd pull a full shift in the fire service. I'd go home. I'd put my little girl to bed. And she was just born, because I don't like to make it easy on myself, do I? So I'd put her to bed, and then I'd go back in the lab for the night shift, and I would be there until kind of like 1 o'clock in the morning sometimes, mainly because stuff would break and no one is around to fix it at 1 o'clock in the morning. So I don't know whether I did a PhD in neuroscience or blinking engineering at one point. But at the time, when I first thought about it, I thought, wow, this is going to be really hard. I don't know how I'm going to cope. But actually, when you find that you do cope, it doesn't feel as bad as you first anticipate it. And then you have a new normal.
And is that level of pressure and all of those different areas, pressure of being a new parent, pressure of being a student, pressure of being a working professional with a job, do you think that was a sustainable level of pressure? Or do you think that was a peak and then I had to kind of get into a new gear and then settle again and maybe I found another peak? That's a lot to do ongoing.
Yeah, it totally is. And you can't sustain, if you're experiencing a level of pressure, you can't sustain that in the long term. So it was always peaks and troughs. So I'd be running an experiment, I'd be doing that for like 2-3 weeks, and then I'd tail off. But there's also stuff that you can do outside of that to help you to manage your stress and to relax as well. So trying to find time for yourself is really important. And certainly as working parents, that's really hard because any time that you have to yourself, you feel instantly guilty about because you think, oh my goodness, I should be spending it with my family. But what I tended to do is involve my family in anything that I was doing. Mm-hmm. So for example, when I decided to write the book and we started to do all of this additional work, my family comes with me everywhere I go. So I've got my daughter here and my husband there. And they come with me and do all of these amazing things. And if you get to do amazing things, or if you find a hobby that you love or some way to relax, actually, when you can share that with people that you love, it's even better.
Mm. And in terms of your resilience, your life experience, because that was such a hard life experience. And, reading about it, you were homeless and you were studying for, I think, your GCSEs, I was reading about, in doorways, and then going into school to take your GCSEs and getting A stars and A's and B's despite all of that. Like your resilience through that time, finding a way to get yourself accommodation, a way to get employment, getting into the fire service. That personal experience, has that helped you to be resilient as now kind of a working adult?
I dispute the adult bit, but that's another story. I think, yes, it has. So, to give you the backstory there, I experienced homelessness when I was 15. It was just before I was 16. And the reason that I tried to maintain a facade of a normal life is because I really didn't want to go into care. I was brought up to kind of mistrust those authority figures. And I thought that care was going to be some kind of 1720s Dickensian frightening place. So I did everything in my power to hide the fact that I was experiencing homelessness. Hence, I would carry on going to school. But I think that experience that I had of homelessness was so horrendous. Honestly, I cannot describe it to you. It was so awful and so dehumanising that I think that whatever happens now, getting out of it was so tough. It took me 3 attempts to get secure and stable accommodation. I'd get somewhere and then it would fall through, and I'd get somewhere else and it would fall through again. So 3 attempts before I had a proper roof over my head. And I think when you live with that kind of consistent experience of failure, then you begin to realise that whatever happens, actually, it's not as bad as the thing that you'd already survived. So when I first joined the fire service when I was 18, which was a dream job to me, because I think from my perspective, the incredible thing about being a firefighter is you're trusted by people to know what to do when they're having, quite frankly, the worst day of their lives. And it felt to me like I'd had quite a few years of the worst day of mine, so I could relate to how people were feeling, and I wanted to be part of the helping party for that. So I joined the fire service, and I've got to admit, initially, I wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms. I mean, I joined, there were 7 women, I was woman number 7, and 1,700 guys, and it was...
In the UK fire service?
This was in the service that I was in.
Okay.
So, there weren't very many of us, and there was, certainly in the region that I was, there was a overarching culture that actually we don't think it's a job for women, and people would say that very openly to me. They'd be like, yeah, sorry, I don't think it's a job for women, no offence to you. And after a while, I'd be like, yeah, well, I don't think it's the job for morons, but here we are, no offence, mate. Oh, I tell you. But I'd experienced sexual harassment, I had unsolicited and very inappropriate pictures sent to my phone, except for in this guy's defence, it was a very small phone in those days, so, I won't judge or anything. And I've been told that not to bother going for the promotion because I don't have a... And after about the 4th time this guy said it, I said, well, I might not have a but I'm clearly working for one, which is kind of the same handicap in my book. I knew then my future lay elsewhere. But I will caveat that by saying this actually represented a really small amount of my time in the fire service. It's been an amazing career. I've worked with more incredible people than, the minority of people that I'm just describing to you. And I've worked with people who are still to this day like my big brothers and who've believed in me so strongly that I've been able to do things that I never thought I was capable of doing. So, it has been absolutely incredible. But that early period where I had experienced some of that negativity, that was really tough. But I fought so hard for that job. I had 31 rejection letters before I got in the fire service. I tried and failed 31 times before I got there. So there's no way that I was going to give someone with a little bit of prejudice the opportunity to take that away from me after what I'd worked for.
I think bias in the workplace, which you had at, an extreme at a young age, affects people's well-being, all of that kind of bias.
Massively.
Is there any advice that you've learned? It sounds to me that you confronted it when you saw it, you said it, and you fought to change it, and you were very driven to change that bias and not let it hold you back. Is there anything else, any kind of wisdom in bias in the workplace that you could share with people here or people listening that might help them, that might be affecting their well-being at work?
Yeah, of course. And it does affect your well-being. It's tough. I lost count of the number of times that I cried myself to sleep because I didn't know how to respond to this. And I'm quite ashamed to say now that there's a lot that happened that I didn't call out at the time because, do you know what? I was young, I was insecure, and I felt like the balance of power was against me. And actually, whether you're being discriminated against because of it's a protected characteristic or for any other reason, we've all experienced situations where there's a power dynamic and a power relationship, and we don't feel like we can challenge it. And that's really hard. What I would say to people is if you're in that position, don't keep it to yourself, reach out to others, because if you're experiencing it, actually you can be sure that other people are or other people can see it. So find allies and speak truth to power. Don't be afraid to speak truth to power. And certainly in my position now, as a chief fire officer, as a leader in the fire and rescue service, I work really hard to try to create an environment where people feel that they can challenge those power relationships. And it's difficult to know whether it's going to be completely embedded and you're always going to be able to create that. But being aware of it and challenging that is so important.
The other thing that just really strikes me listening to actually all 3 of your stories, and we're starting to notice more and more of it, I think, in Squiggly Careers, is just this idea of grit. That kind of the passion and perseverance to get to something that you really believe in, whether that is a personal project, whether that's a side project, whether that's starting a charity, building a business from scratch, when, you come from a very kind of different background or starting point. Just listening to you all, you're all incredibly gritty. You're kind of going, I have got the perseverance and the determination, and you're putting that together with having the right support. So sometimes I think people think of that first one of being like driven and wanting to deliver something, but I've got to do that singularly or solely, whereas actually I feel like all 3 of you put those 2 areas together, which I think is really reassuring and kind of refreshing, so that you can do something with purpose, that you all really believe, I think, in what you do, but you've not had to do it all by yourselves. We always try to finish our podcasts with best pieces of career advice. So this can either be advice that you've been given that has been brilliant, that's really stuck and you come back to time and time again, or perhaps you then end up giving it to lots of other people, or it could just be your own career advice. So Sabrina, as you're going, if you were giving everybody here and everyone listening your one bit of career advice, what would you choose?
I think for me, it would be own your failures with as much conviction as your success. So there's a couple of reasons for this. The first one is that you will always learn more from the things that you do wrong than the things that you do right. And I have monumentally failed on a number of occasions. And the only reason that I can claim any success is because every time I failed, I have got up again. But there's a more important bit for me about owning your failures. And it's one about your ethics and your values. When you own your failure, you're taking accountability. And if I'm with someone that can't own their failure, I can't trust them not to claim a success that's not theirs.
Very powerful. Pip, follow that.
Oh, I've made it hard.
No pressure.
Please. Mine's from somebody else, actually. It was another female CEO in the food and drink sector that gave me this advice, was about finding your flow. I think this applies whether you're in running a business or in your own career, wherever it is, but it's about really kind of being conscious when you're going through your day or weeks about where it is that you get your energy from, and really kind of tapping into that. Because I say that because there are so many aspects of running a business where I am not particularly skilled at, and it's like pushing a rock up a hill and trying to recognize when are those moments where you're doing that versus those moments where it's just free flowing and easy. So for me, brand, marketing, product innovation, PR, this sort of stuff, like it really gives me energy and I come out bouncing. If I'm stuck dealing with manufacturing contracts, legals, it's like wading through mud and I find myself sluggish and slow, and it's a feeling that you feel. So I think trying to connect to that and then figure out how do you make the bits that get your flow a bigger part of your working week. And yes, there will always be things that you find hard and challenging. Don't always lean away from it, but make sure that you're not just, when you're particularly hiring people, only giving away the stuff that you really enjoy, and then you're left with like just a load of contracts to read through. So that's my piece of advice.
Definitely. When we talk to people about finding their flow, we'll often say, even if you just map a week and just think about those moments where you just felt at your happiest, you almost kind of lost sense of time. It's often where you're using your strengths, your values are kind of really showing up, you feel just really motivated and driven. And that can be as small as like a half-an-hour meeting with someone and you think, oh, why that half an hour? Why did I feel so good? And then you start to figure out, and then why was that half an hour kind of so bad? It's like, where do you radiate versus where do you feel kind of really drained? And I think that's a really smart, practical strategy as well, about going incrementally, spending as much of your time kind of in flow as possible, while recognising you all have those moments of thinking, I just have to get the invoices out. Just a practical example there from us.
Exactly. It's very true.
Tom, how about you?
I don't know, well, something I always used to say when I'm talking to barbers, I'm talking to my staff that I used to have in the salon, is about spending your time wisely, because everybody has 168 hours a week, 24 hours a day. You know, whether you're Richard Branson or you're Tom Chapman, it's how you spend your time, isn't it? And I'd say to them, like, if you take an hour of your day after you've, especially when the guys were training, so you go to college a couple of days a week, and then you're in the salon doing hair, doing models, whatever that may be. If you spend an extra hour a day doing that, you're going to be, that's like 7 hours a week. That's a whole nother working day every week. You're going to be ahead of everybody else in your class. And we miss out on one episode of Game of Thrones that night, or whatever that may be, just swap that time out. And it's not actually that much more work effort to put in, just that extra hour, and you're going to be so much better than everybody else around you. I don't think it's that difficult, you know, in the hair industry, to be better than the next one if you just put a bit of extra time, because a lot of people just do the bare minimum. They'll do what's expected of them and go, oh, that's enough, that'll do.
Yeah, it's amazing how much effort and hard work actually matters and makes a difference. When people talk to us about side projects, because our business started as a side project, they'll say like, well, how did you manage to do that? And I'll say, well, most of it is just like effort and hard work. I would say plus doing something you're really interested in. I think if you're spending that hour on something you're not enjoying, you're always going to put the Game of Thrones episode first. Whereas if you're spending that hour and you think, yes, it might be tough and it might be the end of a long day, but actually it's something I enjoy and I care about, and then it's kind of adding that, the effort and the kind of the hard work, that's, I think, when it really pays off for people.
Yeah, definitely. I wrote my first book that I self-published in between, if I had a client that no-showed, or my lunch breaks, or when I was travelling for work on an airplane or whatever, and they're like, how did you do that? I said, well, just did it in, all of sat there watching a film that I didn't really care about on the plane for 6 hours. I was actually doing something productive.
So we're at the end of the podcast now. Thank you very much for being here and being part of the live recording. Thank you so much to our guests, to Tom and to Pip and Sabrina. We really appreciate you sharing your perspectives and giving us your time. And we know that lots and lots of people are going to benefit from it. So thank you very much. To stay in touch with Squiggly Careers and Amazing If, follow us on Instagram. We do daily career tips on Instagram. Lots of really short things to help you with your career. You can find us on Twitter where we're just at amazing_if. So thank you very, very much for being here tonight.
Thank you all so much for coming. We really, really do appreciate it.